I'm here interviewing John Rossetti, who was one of the living in the past experimenters from the 1970s who lived in Iron Age conditions for 13 months. One thing I read in the book was that the snow melted off the roof of the main house when there was a very, very thick deluge of snow, the deepest snow for 30 years, and yet the snow melted off the roof. And I'd always thought that roundhouses were incredibly well insulated and so forth. So does that tell us that it wasn't all that well insulated, or that it was amazingly warm?
Well, the roundhouse was always warm. I mean, one thing people used to say was, you must have been really cold, just living outside in that environment. But actually, firstly, we had quite warm woolen clothes, but secondly, we were always doing physical work. So we were always. I was never cold on that at all, really.
Even outdoors, you weren't cold?
Yeah, you just weren't cold because you were working the whole time. The only thing, we might get cold feet because footwear was useless, but apart from that, I weren't really cold. But of course, we had a fire going constantly in the roundhouse. I mean, it was so hard to actually make fire. It's very difficult to make fire. So we would keep the fire on 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
We'd be collecting special big bits of wood that we called all-nighters to make sure the fire was still going. And then in the morning, the first person up would get the embers and get the fire going again. So we always had a fire going. So it was always quite warm inside, and that heat would have gathered up in the roundhouse, and so that would have seeped out. So it's hardly surprising that the snow melted off it.
And yet, in the follow-up documentary, when you were put up in the hotel in Bath, several of you say, "My word, it's so hot in here."
Oh, that's different because we were inside an actual centrally heated building.
Right.
In Bath, that was just stuffy. It was really stuffy.
Interesting you use the word stuffy, because I'm sure a lot of people would have said that the smog-like smoke conditions inside your roundhouse would perhaps be most modern people's idea of stuffy.
Yes, but we were just used to a different environment to us, being in an enclosed, centrally heated building with lots of clothes on was just unpleasant. We just weren't used to it. Our bodies were producing more heat probably than we could get rid of because we were used to being more active. But going back to the snow, that was quite a tremendous snowfall, and that was getting towards the end of the project when some people began to find out where we were. So we had people thought we were snowed in, so we would be in trouble. Well, the opposite was the case. Right. We were completely self-sufficient. We weren't in trouble at all. The local villagers outside of where we were staying did actually run out of food and bread and milk because they were cut off. We couldn't be cut off. We were cut off anyway. Right. And the press started to get interested in trying to find out where we were, and the Daily Mirror landed on our field in a helicopter and came up to the barricade, and they tried to tempt us with things like cornflakes and Mars bars and chocolate to try and see that we'd be desperate for these stuff, and we just told them to bugger off. To be honest, we said we've done this for like 10, 11 months. We're not gonna stop now and eat chocolate. We told them to get gone. So we were quite firm about that. So it was quite. Afterwards, we noticed that obviously when we came out, we'd see photographs that had been on newspapers, and we'd see it had been quite high profile in the UK at the time. But the thing I was most pleased with was that we were on the front page of the Beano, because Dennis the Menace and Nasher were pretending to be Iron Age people. And so I thought, well, you can buy a certain amount of publicity, but you can't buy being on the front page of the Beano. Yeah.
Excellent. But actually it was sort of the beginning of the end of privacy, because once the helicopter landed and they knew where you were, word got out, and there was a trickle of rubberneckers that would apparently turn up on weekends and so forth.
Yes, that's right. We started to get some visitors, and then we were allowed, some of our close family who we hadn't seen for a year were allowed to visit right near the end before we left. So I think the idea was to get us gradually used to socialising again, rather than just throwing us straight out. But it was still, when we left, it was still like being thrown straight out, and we were all very sad about it at the end. Although, in a way, the fact that we knew that eventually we'd get out kept us going.
Right, so if you could do it again, perhaps if you were 20 now and but with your experience, and were doing it again, and could choose how long the period would be, how long a period would you have picked?
Well, that's difficult. A year was quite nice because you saw all of the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, it would have been nice to have had, say, a year and a half or 2 years, because we spent a lot of the first time just learning, really, and it would be nice to have done it, as it were, properly. I mean, we ended up with great respect for the skills of the Iron Age people that we couldn't begin to really achieve, which of course you get in primitive societies all around the world. So we were just so unskilled compared with them. And as the year went on, we began to realise, we began to pick things up slowly. And by the end, we knew all the different types of wood in the forest. We knew what burnt well, what didn't burn well, what you could use them for. We began to understand our environment, but that takes years, really. It would have been quite nice to have done another year, probably, but I'm not sure if we'd survived it.
Well, not many prisoners would choose an extra year because they got better at being a prisoner. So you obviously didn't feel that you were really in a prison. Most of the time it was more of a playground than a prison.
I wouldn't say it was a playground, but we felt very close to our environment. And that was a nice feeling, to be close to your environment and being able to work with it in order to survive and have a good life.
Right, and so then you left and you were bundled into a minivan type thing and taken to Bath. And had the driver been a stranger to you and just been brought in, what would the people in the back of his minivan have smelt like to him?
Oh, they'd have smelt like probably a flock of wet sheep in the middle of a smokery.
Right. Okay.
That's how it would have smelt. Very strong, I'm sure. Very strong.
Okay, because when I see, I'm watching a film set in medieval York for the sake of argument, and you see the actors wandering around, and you think, well, the horses would have been dropping dung in the street, and people would have been burning fires, and people wouldn't have washed quite so much. And I've often thought, what does the world smell like, and what would people like that smell like? So damp and wood smoke are the dominant smells.
Yes, yeah, and a sort of general wet, warm animal smell, which would have come from us, not from our animals, really. But of course, we couldn't smell it. We were just. That's how we'd lived for 13 months. It was just natural.
It's just natural.